For those of you who may not know me, my name is Peter Lord-Bettness, President of the Parliamentary Assembly, and it's my pleasure to welcome you this afternoon to this third meeting on our call for action, Helsinki plus 50. This meeting will be moderated by Ambassador Zanye, but he has asked me to make these opening remarks, and thereafter I will hand over to him. Can I first of all repeat my welcome to you all, and thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I hope that members and our guests, of whom there are a large number, will forgive me if I particularly extend a personal welcome to Kent Hudstead, an old friend from the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. I think we were probably both vice presidents together. He went on to great things, and I ended up the president by accident, but there we are. And I also extend a welcome, of course, to my predecessor, George Tesserelli, who gave distinguished service, and indeed whom bears a great deal of responsibility for this initiative. But my welcome, particularly to those two gentlemen, but an equal welcome to you all. This initiative was launched by George Tesserelli at the ministerial in December, and at that time he had got it supported by a large number of former senior officials of OSCE and former presidents of the Parliamentary Assembly. I thought that once this had been launched, it was important that the world could see that this was supported by the current political leadership of the Assembly, and the Bureau endorsed that call for action, and jointly and severally effectively added our names to the document. That endorsement has been repeated by the Bureau, although we have yet to establish the time frame of the exercise and where we ultimately hope to be. It's been a valuable exercise for the Parliamentary Assembly in the sense that it has raised our profile, but more importantly, I think has raised the profile of the OSCE itself. One has to remember that it was launched by President Tsereteli in the light of the failure of OSCE to be able to appoint any heads of the four important executive institutions. Now, happily, that issue was ultimately resolved, but it was a potential crisis for OSCE, and hence the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly sought to find ways in which we might be able to assist and find a way forward. Our previous meeting was on the whole question of consensus, and the facilitator, Ambassador Zanye, has produced a paper which you have before you, which reviews the findings and that exercise. And as you'll see from the agenda, that will form the basis of a follow-up discussion on that previous meeting. We will then go to today's topic, ways in which we can revitalize dialogue. And there's a non-paper being circulated, and both CSCE, the predecessor of OSCE, offered space for dialogue between political adversaries and conflicting countries. And that is still the case. although as observers, we think that perhaps not everybody always listens, still less agrees. But it is important that all the participating states have the opportunity to exchange on all issues relevant to OSCE. It's become much more difficult given the deep divisions within the OSCE community, and indeed the potential divisions within the region. I mean, it is told, and I say this not as a criticism, but I think members of the Permanent Council have found that it's become a vehicle for the delivery of prepared formal statements rather than dialogue. And inevitably, these tend to make the confrontational element even stronger. Let it not be said that the Parliamentary Assembly is free of that from time to time on certain issues where members who feel particularly strongly on issues affecting their own country want to make their statement and make sure that it's heard. And I think we can also see that dialogue at ministerial council level really is at a pretty low level. There's only been one OSCE summit in the past 20 years in Astana, I think it was, and there's not been any political statement adopted at ministerial meetings since 2002. Now, when I say the Parliamentary Assembly offers a space for genuine political dialogue, I am not seeking to suggest that we do things better than the Ministerial Council or the Permanent Council. It has to be recognised that we do not have quite the same constraints as those two bodies, in that consensus rule does not apply to the vast majority of the work of the Parliamentary Assembly. It does in respect of a limited number of matters that would come before the Standing Committee. But in terms of making political statements, political judgments, the annual session gives us the opportunity of adopting resolutions and decisions, and we can engage with all our delegations on the various issues. And political diversity of the delegations gives extra opportunity for like-minded members to forge alliances, which perhaps more difficult at governmental level. However, I know that what the PA does only has a limited impact on the interactions within the executive structures. And what we want to do as a Parliamentary Assembly is find ways in which we can use our advantages and exploit our parliamentary contributions to revitalize dialogue in the OSCE itself. I look forward to hearing the ideas that may be put forward this afternoon. But in closing my opening remarks, can I just make one thing clear to our friends and colleagues from the OSCE structures? This is not about the Parliamentary Assembly telling the Permanent Council or the Ministerial Council how to do their job, but rather about finding ways in which we, as a Parliamentary Assembly, can assist them in the difficult task which they have, and success of which is essential if we are going to see OSCE thrive and fulfill its proper role. Thank you very much indeed. Ambassador Zanier?
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for your introductory words. Let's continue the meeting now on the basis of the agenda that has been circulated. As the President pointed out, we will devote the first part of the meeting, I would say about 15-20 minutes, no more than that, to reviewing a little bit the discussion that we had last time on the consensus rule. I have very much in mind the comments that were made by a number of participants on the fact that this should not be a process where there is only a debate or a theoretical discussion about issues, but there should be a concrete follow-up. So with that in mind, I prepared a perception paper putting together some of the key points that were made in the course of the discussion last time. And I would like to ask you to take a look at this paper and to be ready to comment on it. There are a number of points here. First of all, as you see, there are three main clusters of issues that I raise. The first has to do with, let's call it micromanagement in the OSCE, probably also because of the atmosphere of mistrust that is prevailing in the organization. Countries have been pushing for more consensus on absolutely everything, to the point that the chairmanship's hands are often tied. They can't even agree on agendas or on timing on meetings because this is a whole to be agreed by consensus, and this is effectively blocking the organization. So is there a way that the Parliamentary Assembly via parliamentary channels can in a way help overcome this problem and give more strength and more freedom to the chairmanship through consultations, of course, reassuring everybody, but for the chairmanship to be able to make more steps without having to ask every time everybody to formally agree on every issue. The second cluster of issues has to do with accountability. It's very easy to block consensus. And sometimes there is a feeling that it's, just an ambassador getting out of the bed with the wrong foot in the morning, and then he blocks consensus, and then he blocks decisions that may be important for the security of the OSCE community at large. So to have a certain degree of accountability, to make sure that a country that blocks consensus does so having in mind its own security concerns, which should be well-founded, and also asking the chairmanship to check that those security concerns are commensurate with the damage that the lack of consensus could do to the community of countries in the OSCE, and possibly intervene at a higher level in the capital of the country that is blocking consensus if they have this feeling that more needs to be done. And the third cluster of issues has to do with what we could call exceptions on consensus. Other areas, and traditionally the Parliamentary Assembly has been, also because of its own methodology, has been arguing that maybe consensus is not always necessary. And so I'm making an example here that was raised in the discussion of consensus. Is consensus needed at every stage, for instance, of the appointment process? Can really consensus be left only to the ministerial level when there is the formal decision and the previous steps may be decided by the chairmanship on the basis of the consultations only in a transparent manner? So these are the issues. There may be others. So if you feel that there is something missing, feel free to say it. But the other point I would like to also to hear from you is how do we proceed on this? Because on some of these things, if there is agreement or if there is a large degree of support, maybe one could explore the possibility of having parliamentary resolutions on this at one of the sessions of the Parliamentary Assembly, encouraging participating states to introduce, for instance, a degree of accountability or a mechanism of accountability. Do we need to explore and to detail it a bit more before we do that? And how do you feel about going in that direction? Any other ideas on how to do it? Which also replies, and this is my last point, to the question of the time frame for this exercise. I don't think we need at all to wait for 2025. There are things that can be done relatively soon if there is an agreement following the discussions in this process. And maybe, in a year or so, we could already have a number of steps, or you could already have a number of steps agreed and taken. And maybe then the process might become a very light thing, and which may produce some conclusion, maybe in in 2025, but the whole thing could take place in the next few months, in the next year, for instance. So this is also something that needs to be explored as you go and as we go in this process. So I leave it at this from my side, and I would open the floor for any of you to put forward comments on the many issues that I raised and on any others that you feel are relevant for the discussion we had last time. Always have in mind this idea of now let's look at how we can operationalize that discussion. Thank you. And actually, I have a point myself because Dame Audrey Glover asked me to make a point on their behalf. She has some connection problems, saying that she would like to add her voice to the facilitator perception paper and say that it's very important to establish an accountability mechanism to prevent abuse of the consensus rule, and the discussions on this should move forward. So she's in favor of maybe returning to the issue in more detail and discussing the way forward on this. Yes, I see Farah Karimi. Please, you have the floor.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. And Mr. Zanier, thank you very much for all your efforts. I really agree that this is a very, very important initiative, and we really need to act upon that. On the 3 points that you have raised in your perception letter, I think they are very, very valid points, and I agree with them. On the point of accountability, this is actually the main issue, I think, that I would like to emphasize. I think this would be a very, very important step in really pushing the countries, the ones who block actually decision taking, to express themselves, to explain why they are doing, and to really be held accountable for their positions. And if I am not mistaken, I read in your suggestion that this accountability should be mainly done towards the national parliaments. Is that correct? Am I reading it correctly? If so, I would actually suggest that there should be also a mechanism towards the Parliamentary Assembly of OSCE itself. And I would actually encourage ourselves to think about it, what could be a possible mechanism in this process. And then your second, and maybe also related to that, your third point on how to proceed and what could be a time frame. I totally agree with you that we don't need to wait till 2025 actually to make progress on this issue. I am very much, I guess, like many other colleagues, very, very much concerned about all the issues in our region, and I think we are in desperate need of more dialogue and more conversation at all possible levels, from governments to governments, but also from parliaments to parliaments, and also from people to people. So we need really to work on that if we want to avoid more conflicts and more violent conflicts and wars. So in that sense, I think absolutely we don't need to wait. And a possible suggestion could be that we as Parliamentarian Assembly to increase also the ownership of Parliamentary Assembly towards this initiative. Maybe we could start with appointing a special reporter on that, so someone who could really come up with suggestions for resolutions and really try to find so consensus or majorities for some mechanisms on that. So that would be actually my concrete suggestion for the way forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I have Adrian Severin now.
Well, thank you very much. First and foremost, I want to congratulate you for putting down and circulating this paper. I think it's a very good idea to have it, and it's a very good product. I'm not going to speak on substance because you have already picked up some of my ideas I have expressed during our last session, so I don't want to come back with those ideas. But I want to make two quick points. Number one, I think that already we could ask the members of the Parliamentary Assembly to once back home to start putting questions or organizing hearings of their foreign ministers and to ask them what do they think about the paper, the ideas which are included in your paper. Certainly some other ideas could be added, but I think it would be worthwhile to prepare some kind of background, to prepare some kind of, let's hope, favorable context in order to move ahead with this very sensitive issue. So do we have some Helsinki committees in our parliaments, or don't we have them? Doesn't matter. My idea would be that these kind of committees should be organized. But with them or without them, I think that we can already start, bringing in our parliaments, in the national parliaments, this topic for consideration. And the second last point on that question I would like to make is that in a certain time, I believe we could convene a meeting with some experts which beforehand could think to the all various controversial ideas and points and concerns regarding this consensus procedure, and to have an exchange of views with the experts in order to clarify a little bit our own ideas and to see how much could we go forward with some other ideas or with the ideas you have already put down, or we have already put down in our debates and on your paper. So this would be, I hope quickly, my two remarks vis-a-vis your paper, and I thank you very much and I congratulate you for this idea to make it, and perhaps on some other topic in the future we could have similar papers. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Margareta Sederfeld now.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Sanier. And I would also like to say thank you very much for your facilitator's perception paper. I think you have touched what we discussed at the last meeting, and I agree very much with your writings here. And if I should look on the OSCE at the governmental side, I think the accountability, the veto, is one of the most important issue. Sometimes I find it a bit difficult to compare between the governmental and the OSCE PA, the parliamentary side, because we are not the executive branch, we are the lawmakers who are gathering together, but of course we are depending on the governmental side, on the work that they are doing. And therefore I think it's very important. I just agree with you about the need for parliamentary dialogue. And in quite a lot of parliaments do we have this kind of procedure, and it's also stated in our national, the rules of procedure in the parliament, that we have to scrutinize the government and their procedure. And in that perspective, I think it's very important to encourage the different member countries also to have this perspective reflected, if they want, of course, because it's very difficult for us as a parliamentary assembly to have any forces on which issues should be on the agenda at the national parliament. But there need to be some kind of regulation on this, and maybe one idea should be to also compare how other international organizations act, how they work, what kind of instrument are there to what should I say, to regulate first of all, the need for the government to report back to the parliament what they have done, what issue is on the agenda, what statement have they done, but also regulate the right for the national parliament to ask questions to the government, but as well for the national parliament to have an idea under this agreement with the government, what should I put forward on the table when I go to the meeting for the OSCE. So this means that it's a balance, and maybe that's a way to go forward to really increase the national parliamentary level of contribution and also to have an impact on the governmental side. What kind of issue do they rise and what is the result? So that's what I would like to interfere with here, because I see the problem, but I think we need to also act to go further on, as this is an important issue, and it's very much, as you already have said, Mr. Ambassador, and what we also have discussed last time, that we as parliamentarians, we can take responsibility, and that's what I also see as one of the really important issue for this initiative. And it's unique also that we as parliamentarians take this initiative. So it's an important issue, but we need to be realistic and try to find mechanisms forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have Kari Eriksson now, and then I would like to conclude this and do a little bit of a situation, you know, looking at what is the situation, what are the next steps, and then we'll move to the other agenda topic for today. So Kari Eriksson, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your paper. I think that was a very good paper, and it's important for us because I think it's make the discussions much more concrete and handleable in these meetings. I'm also glad to see that some of my concerns from the last meeting is addressed in your paper. And I think the paper and the discussion now is becoming more concrete. And I think that is very good. By generating the political interests in our national parliaments and with our governments, I think that we can raise the profile of the OSCE. And I have mentioned it last time. I have several times raised OSCE issues in our parliament with the foreign minister. Last week, or was it a week before, I addressed in her speech about the situation the need for financing of the field missions. And we had a good discussions about the field missions tasks and how important they are for the functioning in the OSCE. And I fully support you. And I think in the OSCE PA, we can also try to make it more feasible or more simple for the heads of delegations to encourage their delegations to raise such questions in their own parliament with some common statements that relates from the OSCE PA, for instance. And I think also that you raise the possibility to have the distinction between the organizational matter and the political matter. And I think that's urgent, because when we have the situation with distrust, we need to peel off all that we can have agreement on. And I think that is a very good starting point to really analysis what is the organizational matters and what is the policy matters. So if we can manage to divide that, I think that could be a manner of handling the consensus rules, which is so troublesome for us this time. Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you very much for your statement. I have George Secretary now for a quick statement, please, because we need to move on to the next agenda point. George, good to see you.
Thank you, dear Lamberto. Thank you very much. I'll be very short, and let me greet all of you. And I'm very happy to see many faces at the screen. Thank you, dear President Bonus, for the kind words and for all your efforts to keep all the good traditions that we had in this assembly, and of course to add to that. And I appreciate, of course, the very, very effective work of our secretariat. I see here Roberto. And this joint effort, I think, which we collectively initiated last year, or even earlier a little bit, it's going on. It's on its right track, I think, and it will be at the end of the day a very precious mechanism we will see to improve not only visibility of the OSCE itself, I mean, a whole. I'm not talking about OSCPA only. This effort is for all the OSCE, and I think that the offers and this expertise that we have in this group of the people, and it's even beyond the circle, will give a very good result. So to be short at this moment, at this time, dear Lamberto, I think it's very rightly outlined several important things. Unfortunately, I missed last meeting because of some technical things, but I know what discussion was about. And of course, to increase effectiveness of decision-making mechanism and to, let's say, ease these decisions for Troika and for chairperson, that's very important, and to include here experts, and it's very rightly mentioned. I think the modality will be refined further, and also very important how we are implementing that. So we are now offering ideas which based on, I think, a vast expertise of people around. There are former presidents, Lamberto Zanier is a former Secretary General, the people know everything from inside. And that's why I think it's much more realistic than maybe in previous times. And of course, accountability mechanism, it's of course crucial, and it's very important. I would also ask to just to recall one mechanism which we established. Roberto remembered it very well with Makis Voridis in terrorist committee when we sent out a special, we created this questionnaire and sent out to the parliaments and then got back some responses from the parliaments, how they contributed to this issue. I think in different priorities of the Parliamentary Assembly of the OSCE itself, we could increase accountability of concrete and particular OSCE delegations in respective countries, how active they are responding to the major topics and priorities of the Parliamentary Assembly of the organization as a whole. So I fully agree with all these topics that we have in our perception paper, and I guess we have to move on to continue, as I said, to refine the mechanism, then also to discuss among ourselves and executive branch what are the modality and what are mechanisms and instruments to implement that, how it could be achieved, which decision making is necessary, for instance, to minimize or limit situations when we need consensus. So that's, I think, important and fundamental issues. And once again, thank you very much for being so active and let's say, keeping that, as I said already, right track that we chose last time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, George. So I think we are coming to a conclusion of this part of the discussion. What I would suggest is that I might further develop this paper, taking into account the comments that were made today, Also taking into account the point that was made that there are a number of things that can be done by the Parliamentary Assembly itself, and so not only via the national parliaments. I think that's important. And from the comment I heard, the mechanism of accountability seems to me could be the most important of these steps. So I'll try to give it more prominence in the next iteration of this paper. So I'm happy to do that, and then you take another look, and then you can comment on this. We can put it on the agenda of the next meeting. I also took the point that I think Kari was making on the financing of field missions. As there was a discussion in the Bureau some time ago where Secretary General Montella offered to put forward a program or an agenda for the next phase of this dialogue by the time of the summer session. So perhaps even at the end of this meeting, I could give you an idea of what are the topics that we would have in mind for the next meetings, always in this format, so that you can also comment on what we have in mind. Certainly the issue of resource in the organization is one of the topics that will have to be there, and the field operations is an important part of that debate, of course. But there are some other important issues, and perhaps to give you an idea, we could do that before closing this session. So if you agree with this, we could conclude this part of the discussion. Whether, of course, you decide to try to issue a resolution at the next or the following session of the Parliamentary Assembly, it's entirely up to you. Certainly, if you touch on these issues that are horizontal, it would be good to have a very large number of supporters of this, try to avoid a conflict even within the Parliamentary Assembly, try to have something that is supported very broadly by a very large majority, if not by a totality of the delegation. That could be a very strong contribution by the Parliamentary Assembly to making the organization more efficient and more effective. So this is where I would leave it, unless you have other comments at this point. And I would move to the second part of the meeting, which is the part devoted to revitalizing dialogue of the OSCE. And I would like in this regard to thank the speakers. We will have a short panel to introduce the debate. I also circulated a non-paper with some thoughts on this issue that might inspire, might generate comments or criticism or whatever you feel. This is just something that is there to provoke a discussion. But we have today 4 speakers, and again, I would like to thank them. We have Barbara Bartusz. She is the head of the Polish delegation, and as we contacted her, we had in mind also the upcoming chairmanship by Poland. Not that she will represent it, of course, but coming from Poland, I think it's a good opportunity to have her take on how we can make dialogue more vital in the OSCE and revitalize it. We have Dr. Rainer Krum, who is the head of the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, the regional office in Vienna, and a very good, strong partner of the OSCE, and somebody who has been working on initiatives to make the OSCE more effective. Ambassador Kent Harstedt, he's now the special envoy of the OSCE chairperson in office, but he's a well-known former vice president of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. He was very much involved in this project from the very beginning, so it's good to have you here. And Charlotte Bleisch, who is a senior expert, and she's in the office of the Secretary General in the policy unit of that office, so that would be also a good, an interesting perspective also from the angle of the debates in the security days of the organization, where the issue of revitalizing dialogue remains a very important one. So on this, I would start with the panel, and I would like to begin by giving the floor to Barbara Bartos. Please, you have the floor, madam.
Well, thank you very much, dear Mr. Chairman, dear ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, dear parliamentarians. The OSCE is the guardian of security in the Euro-Atlantic area. Meanwhile, today's list of challenges and threats is regrettably long. It includes violation of fundamental rights of international law, unresolved conflicts, disregard for principles of transparency in military action, and infringement of fundamental human rights. Poland is particularly concerned about the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, a conflict which involves two of our neighboring countries. In addition, the COVID-19 pandemic has been a catalyst for previously known problems, and it has put the resilience of our countries, economies, and societies to a harsh test. But we do remember that back in the 1980s, few foresaw that the dialogue initiated at Helsinki would bring about tangible results. What has yet happened? The 1990s witnessed the transformation of the Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe into the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Establishment of autonomous institutions and innovative tools for political and military security. The key to success was early maintenance of dialogue between antagonized parties, a dialogue which was pursued even in adverse conditions. Providing a platform for inclusive dialogue is the core value of the OSCE. At present, it seems that participating states are stuck in a clinch, and this is testified by many years of inability to have a political declaration adopted by Ministerial Council. States are blocking each other, taking unrelated issues hostage, or making it difficult to adopt a budget. Obviously, work must be done to overcome the impasse. The OSCE cannot replace the nation states, but these are parliaments which have a special role to play. We are bodies that hold an extremely potent mandate granted directly by the society. The OSCE has the opportunity to initiate a broad debate with societies, a debate free from the constraints which are holding back states during formal sittings. This is truly aligned to the spirit of the OSCE. And I would like to draw particular attention to a very important aspect of participation of young people, which would perhaps help us fight stereotypes at their source and bring in fresh ideas and concepts. Activities of the OSCE can and should be aligned to OSCE's activities focused on prevention of conflicts and mitigation of their effects, at confidence building and reconciliation phases. Another important issue is the range of our message and outreaching the widest audience groups possible. Unfortunately, the public awareness of the importance of the OSCE or the OSCE and issues we raise, which are essential for stability in Europe, is not satisfactory. It is vital to change it in order to restore trust and confidence between states. We should not predetermine the timeframes or the final outcome of these efforts. It is not possible, but we should strive to achieve specific results. In 4 years' time, we will be celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Helsinki Final Act. And this would be an excellent opportunity to announce such tangible deliverables. As the future chair of the OSCE, Poland will provide its unwavering support to OSCE PA's initiatives. We will support them, bound by the heritage and the legacy of solidarity, both the movement and day-to-day human solidarity. I also believe that there is a need to strengthen the parliamentary dimension in the activities of the chairmanship. As the head of the Polish delegation to the OSCE PA, I will be promoting and proposing an additional meeting for PA's parliamentarians in Poland next year during the Polish chairmanship, and I hope that pandemic will end, that restrictions will end, and that I will be able to meet you in May or June next year. It may be a hybrid meeting. We can discuss those vital topics which were initiated by Mr. Saraceli. And I do hope that this initiative will contribute to better coordination of OSCE's PA and chairmanship, and that we will be able to come up with a joint message for future activities. I do believe that it's extremely important for the OSCE not to lose its identity and specific profile. What makes the OSCE stand out and makes it unique is the principle of comprehensive approach to security. This principle states that it's impossible to ensure stable security without respect for human rights and the rule of law. For Poland, being the host of the OSCE Human Dimension meetings and the seat of the Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, this relationship between hard and soft security is particularly important. In times when we are overcoming challenges such as the global pandemic, we need ideas that are innovative and bold. And we also need to preserve the legacy of Helsinki, Paris, and Astana, and principles which were developed there, which were voluntarily embraced by all participating countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Bartusz. Can we move on to Dr. Krum, then, please, Reinhard?
Thank you very much, President Baunis. Thank you very much, Lamberto Zanier. Thank you very much for having me invited. As far as I understand, I'm one of the very few outsiders here. So don't worry about it. I'm not coming in and give any advice and you're kind of wondering, what the heck? I will tell you about an initiative which I think is very communicative and is all concerned and around the OSCE. So I'm not going into organizational issues. That's not my cup of tea. It's about the purpose and it's about the content. And the initiative we have started, and I think this is extremely interesting for communication, is the Cooperative Security Initiative, because cooperative security, this is the DNA of the OSCE. This is the most important one of the OSCE, besides, of course, what we have heard before. I'm not going into details about this initiative. I'm just telling you about the initiative. The contents, I'm very happy, and I'm sure Lamberto can also send it to you. The interesting thing is, on the one hand side, we have urgency. European security is not as it should be. It's far away from 1990. We had high hopes in 1990. And still, unbelievably, the status quo seems to be okay for many, not of you personally, but many other countries. It's okay. It's not so bad. You can argue, how can you say this concerning Ukraine? It's true, Ukraine might be the exception, but in general, it's okay. So we have urgency on the one hand, on the other hand side, we have status quo is not so bad. And that is a problem for the OSCE because the OSCE should diminish this tension. And that's why we came out with the Cooperative Security Initiative. And I also would like to use the chance to thank Georgi Tsereteli, who gave his support, and also Minister Lajčák, who was at the time chairperson in office of Slovakia. Cooperative security seems to be also counterintuitive looking at the situation today, and the previous speaker has pointed that all out, and you know this all perfectly well. Security is not good in Europe, so how can anybody talk about cooperative security? The thing is, the OSCE is seen as the guardian of cooperative security. So to bring this message out, we didn't think we need the 135th report. What we did is we started with questions about cooperative security, about the status quo, about the challenges, and about possibly what to do. And we did this always in speaking terms, so to speak, with the OSCE. Because our office, and in general, I think, like many other countries here, or maybe all of the countries, think that the OSCE is the platform where to talk. And we know how difficult it is. And I also see Ambassador Rowning, we have met a couple of times also on the screen, and he always tells us how difficult it is. But I'm not talking about difficulties, I'm talking about content. And cooperative security is the content. So we have worked together with influencers. We have started a whole campaign on bringing cooperative security into the public domain. And I understand parliamentarians have many things. You have your national parliaments, you have the Parliamentary Assembly. But if we all agree that the subject is extremely urgent, then I guess we have to step up. We, I'm not a parliamentarian, I mean you, or the ambassadors, or the decision makers, or the experts, or the public, but I'm coming back to that later. So basically, the understanding of this initiative is there is no silver bullet, as you all know. You're dealing with this every day. There is nothing, okay, let's do this and it's getting better. It's a whole process. But it's not a process which is completely crazy to start, because otherwise the OSCE and the Parliamentary Assembly will be in very, very difficult waters. The Paris Charter was once mentioned as the Magna Carta of European security. If that is the case, then I think cooperative security is the instrument to get there. And one has to think about short-term, medium, and long-term. In terms of short-term, it is something to mediate, to come to a modus vivendi. Mid-term is to see how we build up trust, and the long-term is the vision. Where do we want to go? And all this, if you ask, so what has that to do with the Parliamentary Assembly? This is where the parliamentarians come in. You are standing in between the public and the experts on the one hand side, and on the decision makers on the other side. You're controlling, in the best case, governments. And I think the huge role the Parliamentary Assembly, as an example by cooperative security, you can play is to bring the understanding that European security is under heavy threat and we have to do something about it within the framework of undivisible security within the OSCE region. That's huge. And this is what this cooperative security is all about. And this, I think, Lamberto, you have invited me to tell you. And I'm very happy to answer any questions. And I would like just to finish with the fact that because this is so fragile, and in some of your countries, some of you who are listening know exactly what I'm talking about, and you know all it. You know all about it. To bring back the OSCE also to the parliamentarians, if you can do that, it would be much easier for decision makers who work with national parliaments to get to it. I think that's extremely important. You can of course tell me, well, we have done this for the last couple of years every day. And then it's the old words which has been told by many politicians. We have to try harder. And I'm very happy as one of the organizations which works around the OSCE to do more on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Reinhard. And we have taken note of your suggestions and your comments. And I would like to encourage everybody also in the debate that will follow to interact with the panelists. So the next one is Ambassador Hersted. Kent, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Do you hear me okay?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Dear President, dear friend Lord Bonnet, dear Secretary General Roberto Montella, dear former colleagues and friends all over, and new acquaintances, pleasure to address you all. I would like to start by sending greetings from the chairperson in office, the Foreign Minister Ann Linde, to you all. Part of the Swedish priorities is to reach out and have dialogue to a great part of our societies, and also to groups that we might not always have included in our dialogues. So when the chairperson in office travels, one of the priorities is to have a reach out to civil society. So there's always a combination of the official program with governments, but always also reaching out to civil society, and also another priority is to reach out to women and have that as a priority. So to have a very inclusive leadership of the organization. Dear friends, since the adoption of the Helsinki Final Act 1973, the CSCE, later the OSCE, has played a central role as a platform for security and confidence building between the participating states, also in the highly polarized climate for... Sorry, I have to turn off the phone here. Also highly polarized climate for the international cooperation that existed during the Cold War. The dialogue that our organization have fostered have been invaluable as a tool to reduce tensions and find common grounds also between participating states who have starkly different perspectives on our security. This is where our OSCE differs from many other organizations. I normally talk about OSCE as the inclusive house. This is the house where we continue the dialogue when sometimes the dialogue continues in other forums. And that's why OSCE is so important. It's also an organization that all the participating states would like to see the dialogue. So even if we are here to address some of the challenges of the organization, I want to emphasize that this is the chosen place for many of the dialogues. This is not an organization, I would say, that introduces sanctions, but actually continues to encourage the dialogue and diplomacy as a way forward, even though it might have stopped in confrontation with other organizations. It's, however, important to remember that thus the dialogue has been so valuable as it has been, based on the joint commitments that all participating states have freely agreed to. These commitments include the territorial integrity of states and the right of each state to independently make security policy decisions, but also the respect for democratic principles and human rights. Although it's correct assessment that the dialogue in the OSCE have suffered from the focus that it's rightly placed on violations of our commitments, there are few alternatives to continuing to demand accountability, as has been addressed already in this meeting. If existing commitments would be disregarded just because it is uncomfortable to discuss them, an important foundation for OSCE and indeed European security would be lost. Revitalizing the dialogue between participating states will also require, and this is very, very important, require true political will to resolve conflicts and crises if it is to be meaningful. So it's not just to have an inclusive house where we can offer the platform for dialogue. There needs to be a political will of those who come to the table and uses the good offices of OSCE to solve the issues. There is where the Parliamentary Assembly can play a very vital role. As politicians with influence in your capitals and networks in all participating states, you have the opportunity to influence your capitals to engage in a revitalized dialogue based on the respect for our commitments. And let me say this, since I have a long background as a former vice president of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly and been part of the Assembly for more than a decade, and now working on the governmental side and in the chairpersonship of the organization, I can really see it from both sides. And I definitely see how OSCE PA during the last 10 years really have grown in importance. And especially, I must say, that during the last 5 years, and now really showing leadership in some areas. I also see the space for OSCE PA, not just to take more of leadership in some parts, but also leading the way. I can be very concrete. For example, when it comes to the crisis in Belarus, OSCE PA was the first one who could actually offer a platform of dialogue between the Belarusians in exile and the leadership in Minsk. OSCE PA was the first to offer such opportunity for dialogue, but there is many other examples as well. So OSCE PA can definitely take a leading role. Also, this initiative, which you are part of right now, to actually put the finger on some difficult pressure points on the organization is another way of showing leadership, because these issues, of course, one way or the other, needs to be addressed. But we need to remind ourselves that OSCE is also a well-kept organization. It has a great value as it is also, and it's not an organization that has stagnated. It's an organization that continues to evolve. Sometimes there's those who say that maybe this has been cemented for such and such a long time. No, it doesn't work like that. All the institutions, as Mr. Sanier might confirm, there is all the time an evolving work going on to improve the work of the different institutions. And I must say that the chairpersonship of the organization, of course, always have an interest in improving the effectiveness of the organization. So we will never rest in that aspect. In order to revitalize dialogue, it is also important to ensure that participation is equal. Women need to be engaged in the same way as men in the dialogue. Here I see an important role for the OSCE PA, both to ensure that women are included in an equal and meaningful way in discussions in your parliament's activities and parliamentary assembly meetings. The ultimate goal needs to be gender equal representation in all parliaments in the OSCE region, as well as in the OSCE PA. Through your efforts to achieve this, it might be possible for some of the visionary proposals that have been circulated through such as Helsinki Plus 50 Summit in 2025. I want to finalize my introduction by saying that I definitely see a possibility for us to have a vital discussion on the way forward together. And as I said before, the Swedish leadership of this organization at this time have big ears and are ready to listen and to have dialogue with the PA and also listen into the proposals that will come from you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kent. And now Charlotte Bleich as the last speaker in the panel, after which we'll open the discussion. Charlotte, you have the floor.
Thank you. Can you hear me well?
Yes, very well. Thank you.
Perfect. So, dear members of the Parliamentary Assembly, ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you very much for your invitation to participate in this third meeting of the Call for Action Working Group. I'm delighted to present today the main findings and recommendations of the OSCE Security Days, entitled Revitalizing Trust and Cooperation in Europe, Lessons of the Paris Charter, which was convened last October by the then Officer in Charge Secretary General of the OSCE, Ambassador Tula Irjala. We were very delighted to have you, Ambassador Zanier, as well as Vice President of the OSCE PA and Vice President of the Bulgarian National Assembly, Christian Vigenin, as panelists. Your contributions and recommendations were highly relevant. We in the OSCE Secretariat were also pleased that many members of the Parliamentary Assembly attended our Security Days and made valuable contributions to the discussion. Since then, we have followed the PA call for action with great interest. At the same time, many interesting recommendations from think tanks and Track 2 initiatives have recently been published, as we also just heard from Dr. Reinhard Krumm on their initiative, the CSI initiative that we also support, but also very interesting papers from the Wilson Center, CORE, and other think tanks. And I think this adds a lot. Such conversations help us to assess how the Secretariat and other executive structures can support efforts of participating states to ensure that the OSCE is ready to cope with the security environment of their organization's second half century. In this regard, I'm happy to give you a brief overview of the main findings and recommendations of our Security Days. So as you might imagine, all our keynote speakers and panelists praised the Paris Charter and underlined that it was negotiated when states were able to commit to principles to overcome divergence and antagonism and work together to build a secure and prosperous common space based on common values and interests. The institutionalization of the CSE, which broadened its activities, was one of a number of concrete steps taken to heal the former East-West divide in Europe. The CSE produced confidence-building measures and became the framework for conventional disarmament. There was a strong commitment to security, cooperation, and dialogue. There was also strong commitment from neutral and non-aligned countries to advance proposals and play a bridge-building role, which proved essential. However, the panelists also agreed that today the consensus of the 1990s is showing deep cracks, and not every country within the OSCE region shares the values of democratic pluralism, the rule of law, and respect for human rights. And even if they are accepted in declaratory ways, they are often rejected in political practice. Although OSCE activities in conflict area was praised, it was pointed out that diplomatic efforts are not bringing enough tangible results. The OSCE's potential is not fully used by participating states. We are back to confrontational times, and there is institutional fatigue, and the road ahead seems increasingly steep. We hear critics say that the OSCE has lost momentum and that participating states lack political will. Participants underscored the need for participating states to recommit to the OSCE's core principles, which are now facing their greatest ever threat. It was argued that the OSCE needs more engagement by high-level political leaders to chart the way forward and find consensus on the future of the organization. Participants supported a call to revitalize the interest of governments in the OSCE, and several called for an OSCE summit. So as we approach the 50th anniversary of the Helsinki Final Act, we all have collective responsibility to ensure that the organization is ready for the challenges of 2025 and beyond. However, it was highlighted that a summit is usually the peak of a negotiation prepared well in advance, not a place where the negotiations take place. That is why panelists suggested revitalizing the practices from the CSE process during the confrontational years of the Cold War, which were more informal gatherings, coffee meetings of key groupings to find common ground. The Paris summit was moreover possible because of human aspirations reflected in civil society groups and social movements. While we recognize that participating states have diverse views on the role of the civil society, it was argued that there is need for more support and involvement to and from civil society, but not in the same way as before. It is very important to bring now together social movements and governments. Civil society should be understood to include not only human rights groups, but also youth, students, trade unions, universities, and of course the OSCE network of think tanks and academic institutions. People-to-people contacts are essential to rebuild trust. More awareness about the OSCE should be developed through civil society. If we look at all the multiple challenging issues, we need a positive, compelling vision and not just complaining about what doesn't work. There is a need for leaders who can convey such a vision. So panelists encouraged, for example, smaller Eurasian states to take initiatives if Europeans won't do it. There is a necessity to identify key champions to overcome the current confrontational attitudes. This could be, for example, former chairs or former neutral and non-aligned states. The Troika is, of course, a good start, but one needs an engine for developing progress. Some participants also called for more attention to addressing global threats and common challenges that face all participating states, even as dialogue continues on issues that divide them. The CSE was an open-ended and procedurally different than the OSCE. It created the need for decisions to keep the process going. Nowadays, we have preset meetings, schedules, and set agendas. This is why panelists suggested, therefore, that it may be timely to review certain procedural aspects of the OSCE's work. The OSCE should narrow the agenda and focus on issues where it can make a difference. There is a need to make sure politicians understand the urgency that this is a subject they have to discuss. So how can the OSCE be better sold to the ministers? Panelists pointed out that there is a need to go back to the beneficiaries, those in the field who have seen their lives improved as a result of work from field offices, institutions, and the headquarters. Maybe we can find a way to better showcase these success stories. Lively debates seem to have disappeared in many ways at the OSCE, and that is why the dialogue should be put back at the center of the organization. There is a great need to create a space for dialogue, even if it's controversial or complicated. The OSCE has a useful past and success stories, including its work on Ukraine, that can be looked at and or duplicated in other areas. Moreover, the Paris Charter calls for a greater parliamentary role, in particular through the creation of the Parliamentary Assembly, as we all heard and know. So the elected status of parliamentarians gives independence to parliamentarian diplomacy that can at times open the doors for dialogues that are not available for governments. It was argued that parliamentary diplomacy should be considered as one of the most effective contributors to resolution of political deadlocks. National parliaments should exercise their oversight powers by generating political pressure on their governments to implement the OSCE commitments, but also to look ahead to the future, especially with the Helsinki 50th anniversary ahead of us. The different Track 2 initiatives could also reach out to parliamentarians and vice versa. The view was finally expressed that better cooperation among international organizations is key for the engagement in conflict prevention and management, thereby strengthening effective multilateralism. We all agree that there is a need to rebuild trust and to stop the hostile rhetoric. This has to be done with confidence-building measures, as also highlighted earlier today. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. This concludes the presentations, interesting presentations by the panelists. I would like to thank all of you. And I will open now the floor for comments, questions, observations. And first on the list is Madame Serhan Moborgne. You have the floor, Madame.
Thank you, dear Lamberto Zanier. Mr. President, dear guests, dear colleagues, dear members of the Secretariat. It's a great pleasure to see you all here. I hope to meet all of you without any screen between us very, very soon. Back to today's topic. Unfortunately, we all agree on the same diagnosis. The OSCE is suffering from a deep lack of visibility and gradual disinvolvement, which leads to lack of dialogue, or at least effective and honest dialogue. We have a diagnosis, but what treatment should be proposed and could be effective for such a disease? The big question of the consensus rule has already been proposed and could be effective for such a disease. The big question, it's a most important question. First of all, it seems it's essential to identify convergences on our interest and our vision that can guarantee security and confidence in Europe. This can be done in association with the various relevant institutional framework, EU, NATO, and their respective PA, and continue to call for dialogue, particularly with OSCE PA delegation. In our meetings, we keep saying that we need to give OSCE PA more visibility in our parliaments. I think it's more than that. It's our mission too, to put a big spotlight on the OSCE itself. For instance, what percentage of our population, even graduated, knows meaning of the OSCE anagram, or knows its missions, how to feel involved and obliged towards a largely unknown institution? It's not only in our hands. I think the OSCE has much to do to give itself more visibility on its existence and its legitimacy. As far as we are concerned, I would say that we could already try to improve two things: information and accountability. It's up to us parliamentarians to meet our MFA, question him or her on the action and positions of the country in the OSCE, to be informed and then share the informations. We all spokespeople for the OSCE PA and indirectly for OSCE. And parliamentary diplomacy is not a dream. Each link in the chain can help to solve a problem, reduce tensions, or allow a better mutual understanding. Of course, this presupposes good faith and goodwill. It's also our role to control and make them more accountable for what is done and discussed in the organization. For instance, why not organize systematic briefings before and after important meetings, such as permanent and ministerial council and PA statutory meeting? Ask for regular updates and follow-up of the resolution adopted by the PA. I know that this kind of initiatives already exist in some parliaments. I think we have to benchmark the best. We can also try to put a kind of pressure to change the position or to remind them of their obligation and responsibilities, raise issues higher on the agendas. We are all watchdogs with our governments and also with others. The different topics the OSCE has to deal with have to be publicly and largely exposed. The position of each state has to be known. It's not about name and shame, but something like that. But working and cooperating together requires a clear understanding of each other's position and the possibility of changing one's mind. It's by giving the organization greater visibility, by holding their members to account, by never giving up parliamentary diplomacy that the dialogue could be revitalized. Give more weight, more credit to the organization may also imply to make it more tough and or punitive. It would be a pity and would not be in line with the wishes and ambitions of the founding fathers. But still, thank you.
Merci à vous, Madame Borg. Next speaker is Margareta Sederfeld.
Thank you, Ambassador Lamberto Sagnier. Mr. President, fellow colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I have listened to our speakers and their interventions with a high level of interest. I have found their interventions very interesting, and there is, of course, a lot of aspects and energy to take a step forward. I would also like to say thank you to our former president, Tsereteli, for his initiative. I think it's very important always to look forward, and by this I do as well congratulate Secretary General Roberto Montella for the initiative and to continue for the pathway forward. Because an organization who doesn't change, it's out of the game. There need always to be a change and adaptation to the situation today. And yet, let me just mention that in the 70s, when the OSCE was founded, it was a bit similar situation today, but of course there are differences as well. I'm thinking about the Cold War, difficulties for dialogue, difficulties for people to meet, a lot of frustration. And in some aspects, it's a similar situation today, of course not in the whole. But what we have today is the high level of tension. It's what we also see sometimes a step backwards for democracy. But we can change it. And what I see as a really important issue for OSCE and for us as parliamentarians is to continue the dialogue. If the dialogue ends, then there will be no trust building. There will be no work forward for the peace building, and the arena for OSCE will be much, much smaller. And what can we do as parliamentarians? We have already said a few things in the first part of the session about the dialogue, about the importance to raise the issue of the governmental side back home in our national parliament, also to have mechanism in OSCE to support this. And I do very much, I'm a friend of this thought. I think it's important, but it does also mean that it takes some time for us to change procedure. It takes time to get the draft passed through an organization, to make a statement, and for sure, if we want to make a change in OSCE, it takes even longer time, as there is the need for the consensus that we have debate. But what I would like to say, and I'm inspired by Dr. Reinhard Kruman, who said, do it, because we can do a lot of things already to increase the level of activity in OSCE as such, and also in our parliamentary assembly. And what do I mean by this? I think about, for example, what have been raised here from several of the speakers, the parliamentary diplomacy. It's already there. Let's continue with this, develop it. The meeting we had with the Belarusian opposition, I think it was excellent. It was very timely, it was proactive, it was quick initiative. That's the way it should be. But what I also would like to mention is, for example, our ad hoc working groups on counterterrorism and migration. By this, we can, as Parliamentary Assembly, raise important issue. If there is a subject that goes over the OSCE or is a specific topic, start a kind of ad hoc group. Invite people, not only members from OSCE, but also, for example, ministers or experts, experts from OSCE. We have high representatives, we have a person who works with these issues in ODIHR or in OSCE. Involve them, involve civil society, make statements, be active, be on the arena, and be relevant, because that's what's about. And just by doing and taking this initiative, we will be a relevant actor as OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. And I think this is a tool that's underestimated, and we can use it much wider and more active than we have done before. But it's also important always when you start these kind of groups or activity to have an end. It shouldn't be something that goes on forever, because then it's not a destinated activity for a certain project. And I think if we really grab this, think a bit about it, formulate how to do, we can implement activities as a small or as OSCE is active. It's not only the name call for action, we are doing activities. Let's develop this. It doesn't need to wait for another year or another 2 years to have a paper on the table. We can be relevant as soon as we want to do it, as soon as we are active. And I think we shouldn't wait. We are talking about the need for dialogue. We are talking about the need for peace, for security building. Let's do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Margareta. Secretary General Montella now, Roberto.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zanier. Welcome to all the participants, and thank you very much to all of those who have taken the floor. Thank you, Barbara and Ken Tarsted, for your initial remarks. I'm very happy to see that the initiative has taken off and it's going well. This is the third time we meet, and thank you, Ambassador Zanier, also for steering the meeting and also for these very good perception papers that you've prepared. Today, we all know what is the difficulty that we have in the OSCE. I think Seren Bourbon really hit the target when she said that the lack of visibility, but I would say the lack of political attention in the organization is the biggest challenge that we have. We've discussed it very often, the fact that foreign ministers, at least some foreign ministers in the OSCE participating states, are not interested in the organization, they don't pay enough attention. So initiatives like these are also targeted in trying to raise the level of attention at the level of foreign ministers and have the ministers focus on the good things that this organization does. As I've said several times, having been a member of the OSCE field operations, I've seen with my own eyes the beneficiaries of the OSCE products. So the organization does a lot of stuff in the field, in the headquarters, in the independent autonomous institutions, and I think it needs to be strengthened, and initiatives like this can help. But now the discussion about dialogue, and thank you very much to the Bureau of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, under whose leadership we are operating, and who has also indicated to us some of the issues that should be discussed, and Ambassador Zanier will also give us a list of other issues that will be discussed in the next initiatives. But dialogue is indeed the key and central issue, I think, within the OSCE family. And my experience in Southeast Europe, I've been directly involved in a dialogue between Albanians and Serbs, is that dialogue requires a lot of nitty and gritty work and a lot of intellectual posture, which I will come to later on. But here in this call, we have President Tsereteli, President Mutonen, President Kanerva, and some of those I see. Members who, together with me, we've been traveling around the OSCE region in Armenia, in Azerbaijan, in Turkey, in the Russian Federation, in the US. And very often in meetings with leaders discussing hot issues and frozen conflicts, but other challenges that are within the OSCE region, the fil rouge, I would say, of all the discussion where all these problems could be solved if there is political will. I think Kent Ashted also today mentioned about the issue of political will. And the challenge that comes is, how do you forge political will? For me, this is one of the biggest dilemma, and in endless conversation with President Tsereteli, with President Mutonen, with President Kanerva, we've been discussing after long days of meetings, how do you forge political will? What are the tools that an organization like ours has to forge political will? Some say the use of strength. You can use sanctions as a tool to forge political will with a participating state who is not playing by the rule book. Other tools, we have some colleagues from Vienna, also the diplomatic missions in Vienna, could be the naming and shaming. So if one participating state is not playing by the book, you single it out, you speak up, and you name and shame that specific country or that specific leader. Here in the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, and the issue that we are debating today is the other tool, the tool of dialogue. So we are very much believe in this tool, the tool of dialogue, also because within the Parliamentary Assembly, it is easier also to put together members who come from different countries, who have different views on certain situations, because probably they meet sometimes also out of the limelights or out of the cameras. We have organized in Leinsweiler a set of meetings where also Ukrainians and Russians or Armenians and Azeris have had informal talks out of the formal tools that the OSCE has and out of the formal meetings of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. But in order to be effective, and this is my contribution to the meeting and my direct experience in being involved in dialogue between parties who had totally different views. One party would consider the other one a terrorist group, and the other one would consider that party a war criminal. So in order to put together these alpha and omega, the two sides, is that when you are engaged in dialogue, you have to have a dialogue, of course, based on shared values. And this is something that we should never step back. I mean, our shared values is something that we have to treasure and always call whoever is at odds with those values, with those commitments, to call them for what they are. They are at odds with the commitments. But also, when we try to engage in dialogue and when we try to mediate or be part of a dialogue, we should also develop this posture, and this is where I say the intellectual attitude of not coming into the dialogue with the pretense of having this intellectual arrogance of the person who thinks, oh, I know it better, this is what you have to do. This is the 10 things that you have to do in order to meet the shared values that we share. I think we should and we could improve a little bit our posture when we try to talk to those who are at odds with our commitments. And so also an exercise of maybe more humility, but also firmness on the principles, but also stretching a hand, trying to build bridges with those we have difficulties. So my contribution would be, let's try to also try to see if what we have used so far in order to improve dialogue has not worked, because the kind of answer we get is always that we bounce back. Maybe we could try a different methodology and a different approach, which again does not mean stepping back on any of the shared values and any of the commitments, but maybe an approach which is more forthcoming with those who are at odds with our commitments. That's my contribution, but this is an intellectual discussion, so it's a contribution also not only as Secretary General of this organization, but also as a former field officer involved into building bridges between opposing sides. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Roberto. And the field experience and you know, having seen things from the ground, I think is so important in having this discussion, like the role of the civil society. But we'll return to this. Now I have Adrian Severin. Please, Adrian.
Well, thank you so much. I have prepared a number of suggestions of a more procedural nature, but I will leave them aside, and I will pass some of you in writing. I would like to stick precisely with you know what Roberto Montella just said, and also with and to echo a little bit what our introductory speakers said, because I had also in my mind as the most important part of this debate concerning the revitalizing of the dialogue within the OSCE, the idea that, you know, in order to have a vibrant dialogue, we need what I would call, and introduce this concept, a symmetric dialogue or a symmetric participation. What do I mean by that? I think that those involved in the dialogue should not feel that one is tutoring the other. One is up and the other is down. One is teaching and one is the teacher and the other one is the pupil. One is the policeman and the other one is the outlaw. Yes, from the point of view of my values, and I am sure that the most of you share the values with me, and I share these values with you. You know, I think that I'm always right and the others are always wrong. But if we start from that point, I'm afraid that we are not going to have a better dialogue. So, to my mind, a prerequisite for revitalizing dialogue within the OSCE is to redefine the topics for the dialogue, the general topics of the dialogue, by returning to the original role of this organization. CSCE was born as an organization having as its purpose the collective security or the cooperative security, and it's as its specialty conflict prevention, crisis management, and post-crisis rehabilitation. So, do you hear me? Yes. The chances of reawakening states' interest in participating in the debate will increase considerably. Discussion on human rights, democracy, the rule of law must not be abandoned, certainly, but they must be subordinated to the main themes. And we have to admit that, unlike we believed a few years ago, we do not share the same values. This is absolutely true. Let's face the reality. Not all of us are sharing the same values. The most of the values we share, there are some we do not share. We speak about illiberal or sovereign democracy on one hand, about pluralistic liberal democracy on the other hand. So there are various approaches on the issues. As long as we do not recognize that we should base the dialogue on this diversity, I'm afraid that the dialogue will steal. So, and within this frame, for instance, we speak a lot about the rule of law. But when we speak about rule of law, we think to the domestic dimension of this concept. We have a great challenge to my mind, and this is the international rule of law. And we cannot conceive our collective security or cooperative security if we do not address the issue of the international rule of law. Most of today's international law was created in the last century under the influence of the fears and the lessons learned from the Second World War and within the circumstances, the context of the Cold War. After the collapse of the bipolar world some 30 years, world orders up some 30 years ago, and especially during the relatively short period of unipolar global rule, the respect for international law began to vanish, and its rule appeared to be outdated on the background of the new balance of powers involving local, regional, and global actors, and also some non-conventional actors. Therefore, I believe that all OSCE participating states are interested in resetting and rehabilitating the international law. So let's remember that the Helsinki Final Act took over the principle of international law established by the United Nations Charter. In fact, we have picked them up and moved them in the Final Act. It is time, according to me, for the OSCE to take the lead and update the principles and the rule of the international law in the new historical context, inspiring their revitalization by the United Nations, maybe. So I would stop here with that. I think that if we, with the following conclusions, in summing up in the following way. Number one, if we want a vibrant dialogue, a constructive dialogue to bring, which involve all member states, we need to choose carefully the topic for that dialogue. Number two, we have to, when embarking in that dialogue, I think that in full respect of the diversity, which is all one of our values, we have to understand that our opinions and even our values might value. Certainly, nobody is happy if his values or her values are not shared by the others, but we have to live with that. And we have to try to converge from this point of view through the dialogue. And number three, this was a very peculiar thing, but I think it could be quite, good for us if we could put on the agenda our effort towards rehabilitating or whatever, readapting the international international law, which I believe it's one of the main and major tasks of the OSCE in order to achieve the collective security and cooperative security, which was at the origin of this organization. It was at the birth point of this organization. So I stop here with my plea, if you want, and I will come back to you with a short paper, written paper, in order to be able to be perhaps more detailed on that issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. Quite some food for thought you gave us, and we look forward to seeing the paper, of course. Now, next is Farah Karimi.
Yeah, thank you very much. And indeed, there are so many different points are raised, which are really very relevant, and we should continue discussing and debating on those. I would like actually to start with first a question to one of our panelists, to Mr. Kum. I think he made a very important point by saying that on the one hand, we have the urgency when it comes to the really different pressing security issues in our region, but also I would like to add in the neighboring regions of our region, which of course has its security consequences also for our regions. And on the other hand, actually the satisfaction of the countries and some of the regional powers with the status quo. So, and actually, I guess his invitation to us was do something about it. We have to address this tension, because that is something which is actually preventing the action. So I would like actually to ask him, what has he in his mind when he thinks about the possible actions taken by parliamentarians? I think that would be really very helpful thought to share with us. Then second point, and I think that that can be in a way actually connected to the last speaker, Mr. Adrian Severin, because he made this very I would say, in my words, concerning point that we are not sharing the same values. And I think when you look at the real world, that is absolutely correct. But on the other hand, this organization and the way that we gather and we talk to each other is, of course, our aspiration towards the same values, democratic values, human rights, and also the rule of law. Including, of course, international rights, not only international law, not only the domestic laws. But when Ms. Charlotte Bleich was talking about actually her analysis from the security days, was this also one of the points that she mentioned? You know, that we have country, if the countries say, yes, we share those values and in the words, they are not really sharing and respecting those values in the practice. And that is really, I would say, the fundamental problem that we are facing nowadays. So my actually suggestion, question, or plea is, how can we incite actually our parliamentarian assembly to have a dialogue on this issue? Because this is the basis. If that is not respected, if that is not valued, if that's not really believed, so then we have a very big problem. And we know that, but we have to address that. So I would like actually put the question, I don't know to who has really a good idea about that, but can we organize in parliamentary assembly systematic discussion about the values? And if some values are violated in our own actually debates and conversations, that we address that and we openly and frankly debate on that. I think that's really the first step to have a meaningful actually dialogue. And my third point is related to civil society. As someone who has been actually heading one of the largest civil society organizations in the Netherlands, which was Oxfam, maybe known to some of you, I know how challenging and how difficult it can be for civil society organizations actually to connect to the debates taking place in organizations like OSCE. So I would also urge that we start maybe with also really a kind of open mind and finding ways to connect the civil society organization in a broad sense, so that we can really create a better coalition, broader coalition with the civil society organizations. And final point, I said it also in our previous meeting, we are all politicians. That means we are also all the ones who have to contribute to political will. And we can do that in our own parliaments. And I think that is really a very, very important task that we have. And we have maybe come back and again really report on that, how we have raised the issues in our own parliaments and what are the best practices and where we can actually support each other to do that in a more effective way. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for an interesting set of suggestions, and I would like to invite everybody to think about these ideas and come up with also reactions. I think it would be good to build on that. I might add that when I was Secretary General, the very first Security Day we organized was about rebuilding confidence and trust in the OSCE space, and this was before the conflict in and around Ukraine. And one of the conclusions we reached at the time was that the OSCE, unlike other organizations like NATO or the EU or the CIS, is an organization where, yes, there are some common principles and commitments, But then there are some very different perspectives and different priorities and also political priorities, and this influences, and different history as well. And this influences the attitude of the countries and creates pretty deep differences within the organization. So the mandate of the organization was to try to bridge differences, not to cancel them, of course, but to try to operate taking into account those differences. Values, that's an interesting point, because in some areas there may be differences values as well. And this is why your proposal, I think, is particularly interesting, and perhaps it's something you may consider following up. Now, next speaker is Maria Carapetian. Maria.
Thank you very much, Lamberto. Dear colleagues, the OSCE is an important organization, and I believe that each of us thinks about its importance from the perspective of the organization as a whole, separate issues, but also from a specific country's perspective. I'm following this. This is already the third meeting we're having on this topic, and I really want us to find some solutions on how to better our practices of decision making. I think consensus, but even more so consensus building, is a wonderful thing. Obviously, it's the idea when it was put forward was to make sure that everybody is in agreement with whatever decision is made, and decisions are not forced upon each other. And I believe a lot of the suggestions that were aired today build on keeping the idea of consensus, but trying to work in the process the voting moment, so that it ensures the consensus building. So having more debate, more dialogue, calling upon each other when we see that something is wrong, talking about our shared values and how shared they are in periods preceding the actual decision making, to make sure that the idea of veto is used relatively rarely, or I believe we can't have the ideal situation of it never being used. The OSCE is an important organization for Armenia specifically, also because it is the organization that's vested with solving the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, the OSCE Minsk group. So I don't know how is the situation in all of the different countries, but in Armenia, pretty much every citizen knows the name of the organization, because people connect their hopes with the peaceful resolution of the conflict with this organization. So I do really cheer for all of us to find solutions that will prevent the OSCE as an organization, its separate institutions and bodies from wearing down, and contrary to that, to actually becoming more powerful. I want to share one, you don't hear good news from our region of the world very often, and today is such an occasion, so I want to use some more seconds to share a piece of good news with you. Yesterday, 3 hostages returned from Azerbaijan to Armenia, following this second Nagorno-Karabakh war. Dozens of people are still kept in Baku, and 3 of them were returned, and one of them is actually a soldier that was captured following the November 9 ceasefire. I believe that this is the result of international pressure. So the international community works. When people make announcements, when people make calls, this actually does put out results. And I want to ask you to continue working in this direction and helping us return the Armenian hostages that are still kept in Azerbaijan safely home. And this will be a concrete way for us to prove that we are relevant. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you for connecting an interesting point, for connecting the 2 topics that are on the agenda today, which are, of course, interconnected. And thank you also for sharing good news. We always welcome good news from, no matter in which context. Let's continue with the list of speakers. Kari Eriksson is next.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Sanya, and thank you for good dialogue and a very concrete dialogue with practical issues on the table. I would just like to reflect a bit on what has been addressed in this debate. It's about political will, and it's about political or organizational visibility. And I think we also should address the people's will and the people's needs. And I think if we skip the governments, there are a lot of common interests with the people in every country. People want peace, people want security, and people want to live in freedom. So that's the common values that OSCE is built upon. But it's governments that decides that people cannot live in peace, cannot live in freedom, cannot express their will. So we have to reassure ourselves that we don't just address our values and our discussions to governments that don't want change. Then we have to address the people. And that is also a matter of our parliamentarians' task. It is to address the needs of the people, and people need security, they need peace, and they need to live in freedom. So I think we have to, in a way of making the organization known and to address the organization's work towards the people, I think the field missions is great. We have to say hurrah, hurrah for the field missions, and we have to build up under the field missions that are going well. We have to show them both in our national media and governments and in the OSCE region. And I also think that we have to, I think the Tsereteli reminded me on the how we worked in the parliament, OSCE Parliament Assembly with the terrorism. I think that was a very good practical approach to a very difficult problem. And I think that that's also a kind of a way we can ask and challenge the governments to have facts, to have their experience, to have suggestions to what they have done to make successes in the different areas. I also think we ought to broaden our perspective. Many of you have been talking about the civil society and the NGOs. And many civil societies and the NGOs, they are superb in making dialogue. They are superb in making people talk to find common goals. For instance, in the most conflict wars and conflicts we have, Northern Ireland, Rwanda, and Colombia, we have seen NGOs really going into positions to build dialogue and to reassure people that they get their peace back. And I think we should invite to the OSCE Parliament and to use also from the OSCE ministerial level to learn how are they working. What can we learn? How can we build a partnership to this grassroots peace-building organizations? We are speaking about that we have different values. Yes, we have different values, but we have a common obligation as members of the OSCE to promote truth and dismiss lies and conspiracy theories. That is a commitment we have. We can't have parliamentarians in the OSCE who is committed to the charter and to the values that promote that kind of theories and or lies. And we have to talk about them. We have to know what is the discussions going on in the different countries, and OSCE, we as the parliamentarians need to address also these discussions in our own countries and also as an OSCE as a whole. So I think we have some I think we have many common interests. that it is disturbed by a value debate that no one knows how we shall address it. So I think the road we are going in now and the discussion we have is to operate the values into concrete practical examples. So I think that's a good idea. For instance, as Tertelli said, engage parliaments in direct questions. Or unite us with NGOs that build peace, learn and have exchange of experiences, and to have tasks for the parliamentarians that could be operative in their own countries and in their own towards their own people to make OSCE more visible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kari. Lots of creative proposals, but also very practical ones, I have to say. So I welcome this from my perspective. I have Ilkka Kanerva now. Ilkka, hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can. Go ahead.
Very good indeed. So thank you, Ambassador Chanier. I'm very happy to follow the talks in here, and I want to give a short introduction from my side by starting so that we know that what is taking place in the global scale between the superpowers today. We know the geopolitical directions in that respect quite well. They are very well-known phenomena in our times today. So we know China, yes. We know what is going on in the States, looking more and more towards Pacific Ocean and so. And we have here in the Western Europe, we have our own concerns in various ways, including also our transatlantic relations. We know that in every respect, Russia is a very powerful military power, and it is also the third wheel in a way what concerns the relations between the US and China. We can't exclude Russia. And we know that what is going to happen in that respect for the European institutions, our own included. So there are some positive phenomena included also today. We know, for example, that Foreign Minister Lavrov made a visit to China. We know that EU and China, they have had connections and so. But the question today is that what to do, how to make services, the real services for the international development when our concerns are very visible and real ones. So how to create from that day in a longer perspective towards tomorrow, because I don't believe that just looking at the problems and challenges we have today, that's not enough. So we should also at the same time have the longer perspective for the international problems and trying to help the dialogue revitalizing and how to name that kind of connections between all the states. We know, for example, that they have made initiatives for the security permanent members of the Security Council of the United Nations. Very good, yes. But does it mean that it's just the superpowers, permanent members of the of the United Nations. So when it concerns Putin's and Macron's initiatives for the summit for those countries, it's very interesting and positive. But what is our role in that respect? When we are trying to prepare our own contribution for the international development, we are not the organization to take a look from the side, but we are in the role, and our responsibility is trying to help that kind of international development, not only of concerns of today, but also in a longer run. And so we have to try to create our own good services, to say, for the international development. And I very much agree for many of the speakers here today. And I want to mention, for example, our Swedish colleagues. They have mentioned what is essential of today. So I do hope that we have also the longer perspective. We are not ready to solve the problems of today. We know the tensions between the big powers. And that's why we have to take also the longer perspective. And this is my contribution today. Very, very fruitful and constructive discussion today here. And this was just my short introduction for discussion today. Thank you very much, Ambassador Zanier.
Thank you, Mr. Kanerva. Next is George Sereteli. George, please.
Thank you, Ambassador Zanier. I guess we have interesting exchange here, and this is true dialogue, because sometimes when I was thinking about some examples of dialogue that we had before, and we had good, let's say, sessions or a number of very good dialogues in the Parliamentary Assembly on specific topics, but sometimes, you see that we're not listening to each other, and sometimes it's a more compilation of monologues than dialogue itself, which means that we should exchange ideas and trying to reach the goal. And I think for the dialogue in the OSCE, it's very important to have this goal. And I said it many times during my presidency and before serving in the Assembly that it's not just gaining time. And for some countries, we know that that's an instrument to gain time. And that we have to change. And I fully agree with the previous speakers. Margareta said very well, the change is very important. And also can echo Kari's, let's say, the demand to be more active in our national parliaments. But just to have in mind that this organization is facing huge difficulties to stay relevant, to stay important. And we are now with you all planning how to meet after 3 years, 50th anniversary of Helsinki Final Act. And we'd like to see this organization stronger and to keep its, as I said, its relevance and to contribute to the process. So many things around to have this dialogue. But look, when we are talking about dialogue in good faith, sometimes it's very difficult. And that's why we have to think how to adjust our dialogue to the realities. What I mean, when we see that one country is invading another, when we see that in several countries, significant backsliding of democracy, rigged elections, state capture attempts, when we see media, journalists, media representatives are in prison, when we see that politicians are in prison on political grounds, and so on and so forth, we see clear examples of corruption. It's very difficult then to keep the peaceful dialogue. I understand it. But that's, I would say, art of this organization, art of politicians, just to adjust this, to have a relevant tone when we are speaking to violators, when we are speaking to leaders who tend to be dictators or who are dictators or destroying democratic rule in the OSCE area. So my suggestion will be in coming maybe months also think about this, how to have relevant dialogue, purposeful dialogue, and not only to have this just nice talks. It's very difficult to talk nicely with the people or leaders, or even, I don't know, we're not talking about to people, but we're talking to leaders who are committing crimes. So we are a unique organization because we don't have sanctions. We don't have mechanisms when we could punish countries. It was mentioned several times by Sir Seren or others that we can name and shame, which is important tool to. But there are countries and leaders, especially leaders, again, of people who neglect their reputation. It's only most important thing for them to keep the power and to continue the rule they like. So in a region that we live, there are a lot of problems. I mean, not only pandemic. In last years, in 1 or 2 years, what we saw, it was the Karabakh war, again, the tensions in Ukraine. In my own country, we have still occupation, and the people, they live under very severe conditions. So many things around. And here, I guess, and we heard many times this, I fully agree. If it would not be this organization, we should reinvent it or invent it. And now we have it, and our goal to strengthen it. Of course, we did a lot of things. Kent Harstead mentioned about Belarus and our involvement. We've been very active in Ukraine. I don't know, South Caucasus and election observation, but we see that problems are still here. We could not make big, bold change. And I think we have a potential to do much more better, as we mentioned or worked with the Bonus, with the current president, how to improve work of Parliamentary Assembly. Not with the idea just to be very visible, but with the idea to be more effective. And that should be important things. Maybe some we are repeating the topics or issues or even words, but that's a reality. We have to repeat it many times. And very important, of course, values. It sounds a little bit weird that we have different values. If we are in one organization and it's by the will, we signed that's obligation, it means that our values should be very close to each other. And I agree fully with Kari again that, or who said it, that maybe there are different sometimes distinction between them, because in many countries of our region and OSCE participating countries, for instance, when it comes to human rights, values are totally different. But we have all shared commitments and the joint commitments which should be a main driver for us. And dialogue should serve to reconcile those values or to make them closer to each other. But as I said, if country has totally different values, how it could be a member of this organization? Why? Because they are paying contributions? No, that's OSCE is a value. First of all, is a value-based organization based on very concrete principles, and we know all these principles very well. So I think dialogue should be strengthened, revitalized, but also adjusted, as I said. And it should be very, very sincere and frank dialogue when country or participating states violating bravely, clearly the rules of this organization, with this eroding main idea of the OSCE. And I guess OSCPA should be guardian. And one last point, when we are we using all the instruments well? That is also a question. Not only Parliamentary Assembly. Here we can't find answers. We have to be more effective in our committees, special representatives, bureau, and whatever. But even OSCE as an organization, does it, let's say, uses much more well all the instruments that OSCE has? For instance, if you know, and Lamberto maybe knows, or maybe some former members or leaders, OSCE has its court, which which the name of this court, the Court of Conciliation and Arbitration, based in Vienna, and it provides by its mandate mechanisms for peaceful settlement of disputes between the states. I, as a president, and I guess your previous presidents, I did not have any touch with this organization, but I think if OSCE will use its potential, if it has, and it has this potential because it exists as one of the structures of the EC, but never used. And in times when we have so many divisions, we have so many clashes, we have so many, let's say, confrontation in our region, and nobody never, as I know any country applied to this conciliation or arbitration or on any topic. So this is one example that also in the OSCE as a whole, in the organization, we're not fully using instruments that we have. So I'm very sorry for it was not planned that longer statement, but I think that we can really make change, and there are very good ideas. And all these ideas, as we said many times, we have to also push them also in our national parliaments and to increase, of course, the accountability. Or our delegations coming to Vienna or coming to the annual sessions, we have sometimes statements, but maybe never reporting what the delegation did in its own country in terms of contributing to the goals of the OSCE. It's happening very rarely. So this also should be considered. Thank you very much, and sorry for my long intervention.
Thank you, George. Next, I have Rainer Krum, I imagine, to answer the question by Farah Karim.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you very much for the question, Mrs. Farimi. The tension between urgency and status quo. And before I answer your question, I want to point this out. I mean, the real reason, the purpose of the OSCE for many people who know the OSCE is still to do exactly that. You have two countries in your reigns, meaning members, who can destroy the world manifold. Still, we thought this is over after the Cold War. It's not. We have nuclear powers. And I think this is one of the purpose you had, unfortunately, but still you had quite a number of arms reduction treaties within the OSCE, partly not working anymore for whatever reason. But that is a core and still hasn't changed. I just wanted to point this out. But this is not the answer, Mrs. Karimi, to your question. I think OSCE parliamentarians have the fantastic knowledge of the OSCE, of the history of the OSCE and the KSCE. And what I just pointed out, the tension between urgency and status, you are the ones who can bring this international parliaments. This is huge. You can do this. I'm not saying that other normal parliamentarians cannot do that, but you have the experience. You have talks like this, which are absolutely fantastic. And out of this comes my second point concerning civil society. Yes, civil society is important. But society in general is also important. And I think it's not alone okay. You need more than reports or discussions. You have to bring the attention of this tension between urgency and status quo, the fact that we still can destroy us manifold, into the public. Look what happened to climate change and its fight. 15 years ago, it was kind of, yeah, we know it. Now, there is even a decision by the German constitutional court, that German politicians have to make sure that there is not a decision which will go against any fight against climate change. So would it be completely crazy to make sure that the security issues going into the same directions? Because as I can't remember who it was, person said, peace is not everything, but without peace, everything is nothing. Thank you.
Thank you, Reinhard. I have three more speakers and then closing remarks by President Lorbones. And we have 10 minutes, so please short interventions. Now, Christine Muttonen. Christine.
Thank you very much. Just very short. Mr. Kuhn, what you just said, Reinhard, yes, we can do it. Parliamentarians can do it. But I still think that we need the public, the civil society with us, because when we have the civil society, the public on our side, then we can use this pressure. So they create pressure, and we can use this pressure to go to our governments and force them into a development which we think is necessary. And I think the OSCE as a platform for dialogue is more than necessary, and the dialogue should be a very, very broad one. So we need civil society, we need the dialogue, we need also ways how we can create informal dialogue, because what I realized is whenever there is a public, whenever there is a press, then the dialogue is very different and there are public statements. So before we can start to build trust, we need this kind of dialogue where we can establish this trust. And one thing is also that I think we should also practice this dialogue among the parliamentarians, that when we start to talk about issues, transnational issues that are important for all of us. So you mentioned, Reinhard Kuhn, you mentioned climate change, but there are many more. What we did, for example, was to create this committee on terrorism. So there were such different views what you have to do to combat terrorism. And when you create a committee like that and you try to bring in all the groups, the different groups, then you start a real dialogue with the different opinions, but then you have the dialogue. And something which Kent mentioned, and I just have to stress that, is the question of women. We know from all the research that whenever there are women at the negotiation table, the result is a different one. So just let me put that into your mind again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christine. I have Spencer Oliver now. Spencer, good to see you. Good afternoon. Good morning to you, actually. You should unmute yourself.
Oh, yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, thank you. We hear you now.
Roberto. Greetings to old friends and colleagues. I'm reminded of a saying by a famous American philosopher named Yogi Berra, who said, "This is deja vu all over again." I mean, these discussions have been taking place forever, particularly about the consensus rule. But of course, I would remind people that it is only because of the consensus rule that the Parliamentary Assembly was created in the first place. When they were negotiating the Charter of Paris and wanted a parliamentary dimension, all of the diplomats in Vienna decided that the Parliamentary Assembly should be a sort of a subcommittee, informal subcommittee of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, which was objectionable to the United States not being a member of the Council of Europe and not wanting to participate in a useless exercise. So the United States, at the urging of the US Congress, used its veto to block the proposal by the diplomats in Vienna. And eventually, to make a long story short, I went to Vienna at the request of the Secretary of State, and we wrote the provisions of the charter. I wrote the provisions that are in the Charter of Paris about the Parliamentary Assembly. The most important thing was that the parliamentarians themselves would decide how they operated. So we operated by majority rule. We elected our officers by majority. We passed resolutions by majority. We functioned by majority vote, and the issues that were discussed were always very lively and sometimes very useful, and we passed some resolutions which were sometimes not very popular. I remember when Adrian Severin addressed the Permanent Council, and he told them, not only is the consensus rule undemocratic, it's anti-democratic. Didn't go over too well with some of the guys sitting around the table. But there are ways in which this can be improved. I mean, serious negotiations take place behind closed doors, but serious discussions should take place in the open. And that is one of the things that's missing in the OSCE is open dialogue among the governments on issues of importance. Open dialogue is one thing. Negotiations about decisions is another, but they can be separated. And we can do things like on visibility on using the veto. Instead of having someone explain why they're doing the veto, make the foreign minister come to the Permanent Council in open session and explain why his country is using the veto. I think that very few foreign ministers would be willing to do that. Therefore, I think the use of the veto might not be as often as it is now. But I know I don't have much time, but I just want to say that the Parliamentary Assembly has played a great role in the development of the OSCE, and it still can make a huge contribution. And I just wanted to remind people that the U.S. Congress was responsible for getting the United States to exercise its veto to prevent the Parliamentary Assembly from becoming a subcommittee of the Council of Europe and allowing it to go forward and create itself. So there are many ways to do these things. And I think that perhaps, I'm not going to go on with some of the other stories. I know too many old war stories, but I want to thank you, Lamberto, for giving me the floor and say it's great to see some of my old friends and colleagues again. Thank you very much.
Thanks to you, Spencer, also for reminding us of a good veto. Let's move on. The last speaker before the president, Ulvia Gallero. You have the floor, madam.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Dear colleagues, I'm greeting all the participants and the organizers of this meeting. It's a great honor and pleasure to be among you here today. I'd like to underline the essence of the work which we are doing now. The initiative started by the PA has great influence to all OSCE. As a parliamentarians, we do have advantage of sharing our thoughts without hesitation for creating new ideas for development of the OSCE. But unfortunately, the image of my country has been wrongfully accused by our Armenian colleague here, as usual. They are always addressing different groundless accusations to the address of Azerbaijan, and I think they do that deliberately to distract us from the subject, to prevent us from voicing major problems Azerbaijan facing nowadays. She wrongly mentioned that Azerbaijan is facing some influence, and that's why Azerbaijan released 3 captives. The humanitarian decision made only by our own will, not one can influence us. As a result of investigation, it was concluded that 3 Armenians have not participated in any terror acts and haven't killed anyone. As humanitarian gesture, Azerbaijan released them. And using this opportunity, I would like to underline once more that Azerbaijan has always followed to international humanitarian law and trilateral statements. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we are getting close to the end. I have President Lord Bowness now making some final remarks. After that, I would like to make a few technical, give you a few technical informations myself. Lord Bowness, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Zanier, and I will be as quick as I can. I want to thank all the contributors to this afternoon's discussion, which I'm sure is going to be a great help in your preparing the future participation papers. We've had a lot of discussions about dialogue on values, and clearly, although the Parliamentary Assembly may not debate as a separate issue, the Assembly and its committees are very active in responding when we see breaches of what should be our shared values. and we've offered to help in dialogue between the opposition and the present government of Belarus. There have been discussions with the representatives of Mr. Navalny, the Russian prisoner. We've had lots of discussions and press releases about the actions of the Turkish government in banning one of the opposition parties. And more recently, we've issued statements about sanctions from the Russian Federation against the President of the European Parliament. So whilst, of course, there's always an opportunity to improve, there's always the opportunity to find other discussions. I think that we have a record of responding with the assistance of our Secretariat, both as members and as officials, to breaches when we see them. The other matter which clearly comes back in every discussion we have about the OSCE is the need to raise its profile with our national governments. I entirely agree with that. It's not easy. We talk sometimes about raising debates in parliaments. We need to remember that all parliaments work in different ways. Some parliaments, the agenda, the business, is much more controlled by the executive than in others. That doesn't mean there aren't other ways of doing it, but clearly the one thing we know we can do and was within our power, and that is to go on trying to raise the profile of the OSCE with our national governments. Thank you so much again for your contributions. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you, Mr. President. A few concluding words from my side. First of all, the follow-up to this meeting. We will issue a report, and there will be also here a bit of a perception paper to picking up some of the suggestions you yourselves put forward, and taking into account the point made lastly by the President, that very often things happen by doing them and by acting on specific cases. So there's not always a need to discuss the principles when you can act on them instead. So there will be a paper which may be a bit more complicated this time, but which should help us return to the issues. And in fact, this is now linking into the question of the agenda, because as you see, we cannot really stop the discussion, move from one topic to another. We need to complete the discussion of a topic and see what concrete follow-up we can have. And I'm keen to continue that. So even on consensus, we will come back. I will refine the paper, and I will come back having heard your views with some additional proposals, and then it will be your decision on the direction in which you want to move. I wanted to give you also a sense of the topics we have in mind for next meetings. But first of all, at the end of the month, you may have seen already an invitation we circulated. We'll have a youth forum. We would like to engage with young parliamentarians and also young politicians, members of political parties, youth political groups that want to engage. Of course, you're welcome to participate in that meeting as well, but we would like really to push the young ones to speak and to be active in that meeting, to see also how the young generation sees the agenda of an organization like the OSCE, and also how they see their role in an organization like the OSCE or in general in the international scene, because very often young people complain that there is little space for them to play a role, to even to get jobs and to contribute through those. So all these issues will be on the agenda, and I'm really looking forward to empowering them. And we will have also a strong gender perspective in this. Having said that, we plan to have down the line also a meeting on gender. And I think Christine Mutonen was mentioning, 1325 and role of women in mediation. I think these things we will have to put on the agenda, so there will be a meeting down the line involved on this. I would like to do something on the human dimension. I will work with Ambassador Stroal on this. I will get in touch with him to pin him down a bit. And of course the ODIHR directors, the previous directors and the current one, to see also what their advice is. But to look at some of the difficult issues there. This introduces another topic on which there is a discussion, which is the interaction with the committees of the Parliament. Because when it comes to the agenda of the organization, I think it's important that this group interacts with the committees. So we'll have to see with the chairpersons of the committees, or maybe with the committees themselves, to have a bit of a debate on the agenda of the organization when we move away from horizontal issues and we enter into the actual agenda of the organization. We will have to see, and that will be also for the president to decide how he wants to do that, but to see how the interaction with the committees will develop and how they can contribute to this process. In July, I'm discussing now with the Austrian delegation. There will be the summer session will be mostly online, but there will be a presence here in Vienna, and we would like to use it to have immediately after the summer session a meeting on the question of the profile of the organization, and starting with Austria, where we have all the delegations, we have the secretariat, and so the profile in the parliament, profile with the media, and also this will be open to whoever is interested in attending, but it will be focused mainly on what can be done here in Austria to raise the profile of the OSCE. But as I say, this is a tentative idea and it needs to be finalized with the Austrian delegation. After the summer, those will be the topics, but we will, the Secretary General Montella will provide at the summer session a better plan that we are discussing internally for the activity of the group, more or less for the next year. Let's put it this way. I don't want to give a longer term or take a longer term commitment for the group. I've also been asked what is the composition of the group, because there was a sense that it was selective, and I would like to dispel that impression. So this is the only group working on these things, and the invitation is sent to all parliamentarians, to all delegations, so all members of the Parliamentary Assembly are invited to this discussion, and it's up to them if they want to attend or not. On top of that, we invite routinely the signatories of the call for action. Of course, they were the ones who started the whole thing. We invite the representatives of the institutions to be present from the Secretariat, but also the autonomous institutions are all invited to attend, and if they feel they want to contribute, they can do it. Every now and then we have some ambassadors on the intergovernmental side who ask us if they can participate. We are not actively inviting them, but if they ask us to attend, we don't say no. So there are a few interested ambassadors every now and then are appearing in this thing, but we don't want to sort of impose our meetings to the intergovernmental side. But if they're interested, we don't want to say no for the sake of transparency, and we want to keep this process open and transparent. So these were the points, also clarification from my side. With this, if there are no more requests from either the President or Secretary General, I would conclude the meeting and look. I see the Secretary General. No, okay. So I would conclude the meeting at this point. Thank you very much. Thanking all of you for a very active, engaging participation in the discussion, and so you will see our own interpretation of what was said, but you will have also your opportunity to comment on our interpretation of how this discussion went and what the key points were. Thank you very much, and have a nice evening, everybody.
Goodbye, all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Madloba.
Hi.
Thank you, everyone.
Madloba. Spencer, it was great to